This is the GI Microcast recorded on Friday the 13th of September 2024. I'm James Batchelor, Editor-in-Chief of GamesIndustry.biz. I am joined as always by Chris String, Head of GamesIndustry.biz. How are you, sir?
I'm so busy in a really good way, but really busy. We've got our this is going out on a Monday. So in a couple of days, we're running on Wednesday. We're doing our HR Summit and Best Places to Work Awards. And I've spent the last 4 weeks in like a state of anxiety and panic around getting everything done and everything in. And everything's really in the process now, right? Everything's deep. We're nearly there. And I'm just at the script writing stage because I'm on stage at like 9 to do the first session. I'm hosting 2 of the panels. I'm hosting the whole conference. And then we go into the awards and I'm hosting the awards. So I'm basically on stage between 9 and 7. But I'm getting to that point where the anxiety and the panic about it is still there. But there's a bit of excitement sneaking in now, and I'm looking forward to seeing everybody. We've sold quite a lot of tickets. It's a really cool venue. It's the Royal Institution in London, really sort of like a lecture-style theatre. It's really cool. I can't believe I'm actually going to be on stage. Well, it's not really a stage, but I'm going to be sort of speaking to a load of people in this setting. It's sort of cool. But yeah, I'm looking forward to that. But then there's also, there's a story that's going to be on the site tomorrow, an interview, which is an exclusive for us. So looking forward to that. I'm working on that. And all the news, James, just all the news.
So much news. It has been absurd to the point where we are going to be covering more in this microcast than we usually do. And even then, there's not going to be enough time to cover everything. So putting our cards on the table at the start, like the news at the start of the week from Friday night, there was the Roblox annual developer conference, and they've announced that they're going to be introducing premium games on PC and then later on other platforms. So developers will be able to sell games, not just selling items and cosmetics, sell full games in Roblox and up to 70% revenue share. We don't have time to talk about that.
Or the Unity runtime, yeah.
Like I say, yesterday, Unity cancelled its runtime fee. So for those who remember, obviously this time last year, they introduced this new runtime fee that we're going to charge users for every install they get. Caused a massive backlash. We talked about it extensively on the site and on the Microcast, if I remember rightly, and they reversed it after the backlash. They reversed it to the point where not for personal users, and then now they have just dropped it completely. Yeah. We don't have time to talk about that either. So,
we don't have too much time to talk about the news last night, right?
Well, yeah, last night you jumped on and wrote a story. Talk us through what happened with Annapurna.
Well, yeah, it was a bit, in a way. Now that we know, the signs were there, right? So Annapurna Interactive staff walked out last night. Successful games publisher behind What Remains of Edith. Have I got that right? What Remains of Edith Finch and Stray and games like Cocoon and stuff like that. All their staff walked out last night after after negotiations between Annapurna Interactive and its parent company Annapurna Pictures. Annapurna Interactive staff wanted to spin off as an independent business. This actually does happen quite a bit, oddly, in the publishing space. But they couldn't get an agreement, so they all just walked out, which is a bit of a shock. It was a complete shock. But actually, if you looked at it, back in July, Annapurna Pictures hired a guy called Hector Sanchez. And Hector Sanchez actually set up Annapurna Interactive. He was one of the founders of Annapurna Interactive. He went somewhere else. He went to Epic. He's been rehired, but not on Annapurna Interactive. He's been hired as their head of games, head of new media and interactive or whatever. But for Annapurna Pictures. Annapurna had put in an exec for games in their core business, and then they also did a big deal with Remedy, which we only talked about a couple of was it last week or the week before? And that deal with Remedy was with Annapurna Pictures. The Annapurna aren't publishing Control. The deal, by the way, to remind you, is Annapurna are funding Control and the Control spin-off multiplayer game, and taking Alan Wake and Control to TV and movies. That was an integrated deal that they did, but was with Annapurna Pictures. It wasn't with Annapurna Interactive. So we're starting to see the Annapurna studio business wanting to integrate their game stuff more with their TV and films and all that kind of stuff. And that drew a question of Interactive. But Interactive seems to have stopped. Just they're in a situation now, and the concern I have with this whole move is whether Annapurna are what this means for the studios left behind. Because Annapurna's funded a lot of games. It's like they've got a dozen games on their docket, right? They're to come out still over 2024, 2025, and 2026. And they don't have any staff to do that. I mean, they'll find staff, they'll use agencies, they'll put more effort on their marketing teams and outsource that kind of thing. But if I was a studio there who've had their game funded by Annapurna, I'd be a little worried that the focus might not be quite as there anymore, that their heart isn't in the publishing of games anymore. So for those studios sort of caught in the middle of this, that's perhaps a concern. Obviously, we'll have to see what they do and how they react to it. But yeah, Annapurna's clearly shifting its strategy. There's a lot of studios now who have got games coming up that Annapurna are committed to publishing, getting localization done, getting marketing done, getting PR done, who are sort of caught in between it. But yeah, it's definitely a bit of a shock.
We're actually in the process of trying to reach out to some of those studios, so hopefully when you hear this, we may have something either up on the site or up on the site soon, like seeing the impact that this sort of thing has on developers. So the
truth is it's unknown. Right now they won't know who they're talking to and stuff, and that's going to have to get worked out. The transition will be a bit painful, but what the problem is whether or not the thing is with publishing, the key to a good publisher, as I keep getting told, is not how many cool big hits they've got. It's what happens if your game isn't a hit. Now, Annapurna, I mentioned some hit games there. They release a lot of games, and most of them aren't hits. And what do they do when that doesn't happen? How do they support your game? How active are they in pushing it and trying to make sure at least makes a bit of money? And how do you play the Steam game and all that kind of stuff? And those publishers that are really, really going to work as hard as they can, whether your game is a hit or not, they're the key ones. And if your Annapurna Interactive is now a much, much smaller team with a lot of outsource agencies people, and the core business is now mostly focused on these more integrated opportunities, that might be a little bit of a concern, but this is speculation. I guess we'll have to wait and see what they do.
The big story that we're going to be talking about this week is what everyone's been talking about all week, which is the PlayStation 5 Pro. But for this story, we're going to be bringing in a little bit of help. We're joined by Ampere Analysis Research Director Piers Harding-Rolls. Piers, thank you so much for joining us on the show.
No problem. Great to be here. Nice to see you, James and Chris.
We've called you on because we're talking about the PlayStation 5 Pro. You had a great analysis go up like within minutes of the announcement. And before we kind of dive into kind of what we think of the machine and sales expectations, like really brief recap, because I think everyone knows about this at this point. So Sony announced this week the PlayStation 5 Pro, the long-rumoured mid-generation refresh for its PlayStation 5 console. Big features are things like 8K support, Wi-Fi 7. The three that they're really pushing is the larger GPU, the larger graphics processing unit, which offers 45% faster rendering, advanced ray tracing techniques, AI-driven upscaling. There's 50 titles, current and upcoming, that are confirmed to be getting support for this. It launches November 7th at $699.99, so $700, but also £700. I lost it. I think it was like 700 euros. It was like
800
euros, probably 800 euros.
Yeah. 120,000 yen.
120,000 yen. The price has taken up a lot of the discourse around this, but I thought it'd be better to have a kind of a more general discussion about this. Piers, your first reaction to what the PS5 Pro is as a product, as as an offering to customers?
Yeah, I would say, it's a high-end product for the enthusiast who loves PlayStation, loves the PlayStation brand, and is happy to splash cash on things that are PlayStation and play games at the best possible resolution on a console. And in that respect, I think it's going to resonate with people that have owned a PlayStation 5, that are the early adopters who probably paid over asking price at the very beginning of the cycle and are happy to splash cash, 4 years down into the cycle. So mostly people that will upgrade mid-cycle and then probably convince some other people that haven't made the leap yet, with the idea that they're just going to get the best experience in a console and move from the PlayStation 4 up to the PlayStation 5 Pro.
I obviously, one thing that people don't talk, I talked about this in the piece I wrote this week, is how well the DualSense Edge and things like the PlayStation Portal has done. That those have been, I know they're quite high priced top products, and for what they are, and they do really well. And there's this sort of audience for luxury gaming audience, this sort of premium audience that will spends $100 on special editions just so they can get hold of a game a couple of days earlier. This audience exists. It's not the biggest audience, but it's a very lucrative one. And I was actually surprised by some of the discourse around this about who is this for? And I think it's pretty obvious who it's for. And I think it's very easy, and it's not even a small. Well, it's a small group, but it's not it's not a small, like, tiny little product for you. There is a lot of people out there that will buy this. So
I think so, yeah. I mean, I generally agree with that. I think there's also some interesting dynamics going on globally where there's definitely more PlayStation enthusiasts emerging in markets which weren't around really in PlayStation 4 Pro era. So, like mainland China, a lot of imports of PlayStation 5 from other markets in Asia. You got countries in the Middle East like Saudi Arabia, which are also adopting consoles at a fast rate, and Sony, that's where Sony kind of dominates in terms of adoption. So in that respect, I expect PlayStation 5 Pro to sell pretty well in those markets as well. So it'll be interesting, the dynamics of the kind of sales of the product compared to PlayStation 4.
It doesn't solve PlayStation's problem, really, which is, if you call it a problem, a challenged opportunity, what term you want to use, which is the fact they've got a lot of people still playing on PS4s. They've got lots of people still playing on Nintendo Switches. They want to upgrade those users to their hardware, and they will have quite happy playing Fortnite or Warzone or whatever it is on those older machines, and they've not had too much incentive to upgrade. PS5 Pro isn't that solution. I don't think it was not expected to be. It's never designed to be a solution to that.
No. But those people on PlayStation 4, they've got to keep them in the ecosystem because they are spending lots on those live service titles. So, the players that are playing Fortnite and the other live service, the sort of long lifetime titles, those are very important cohort to keep monetizing. So whether they're on PlayStation 4 or on PlayStation 5, obviously they want to shift them over during the life cycle because the evidence is there when you shift over to PlayStation 5, and this will be the same for PlayStation 5 Pro users. Another step up, that these people spend more money. They're willing to invest in the new hardware that they've got. Obviously, we've got GTA 6 coming, and that's going to be a pivotal point in terms of
conversion.
I think transitioning people from PlayStation 4 to PlayStation 5 because it's not available on those platforms. That's a significant moment.
It's going to take games to do that, right? Not new. Well, maybe some new hardware, but it's got to be cheaper hardware. I think there'll become points where PS4 stop working so well, or the enhancements being made to Fortnite, whatever, are noticeably better on the newer hardware, and that will cause people to step up and come across. I think it's just one really long transition. It's interesting, Piers, because you mentioned in your analysis, like, it's interesting, we're 4 years and we've got the upgrade this time, and last generation it was 3 years. Do you think this is we're looking at, like, I'm looking at how, in fact, we still don't have a game from Rockstar, and we still don't have a game from Naughty Dog. It still feels like, to a lot of people, it feels like this generation, we're not at the midway point. It doesn't feel like we're at the midway point, even though.
Well, I think the pandemic just messes with everyone's kind of view of the timescale of this, because obviously it came in 2020 and it's already been around for 4 years, but actually it just doesn't really feel like that for a lot of consumers, I think, and that's partly because of the technology. Even like PlayStation 5 is still a very powerful device. It still produces great 4K looking, perhaps not at the frame rate that some people want, but great looking content. Everything looks good. So it's still a very legitimate console. So there is that kind of dynamic, and I guess the question we're thinking about is, because it's come in year 4, does this mean we're actually going to get a slightly longer cycle this time? Because in our data, we've got PlayStation 6 coming in 2027, end of 2027, but actually, conceivably, it could be later than that. So perhaps the end of 2028 or something.
Mark Cerny said, Mark Cerny said in an interview we did with him back in June that we've got to the point now where the time it takes to build and manufacture and release a new console is now shorter than it is to do that on a AAA game. And that must change the dynamic, how you think about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I don't know. They've obviously got lots of plans, and they'll have a window which I think they're going to move, shift to the next generation. But it may be delayed because this has come a year late, and that, I'm not quite sure whether that's because of the pandemic kind of sort of mix and the fact that we had hard times when it came to supply chain for the original PlayStation 5, or whether this is actually a technological thing. The technology wasn't ready to produce a PlayStation 5 Pro, because there is some AMD technology in there which is not available to the PC audience yet. That technology is coming, should be coming soon, but it's not available yet. So it's making some significant advancements in that respect.
And those games aren't even making use of it, right? So this is the other part of it. Is so many of the big games that we're seeing released are being released on PS4. We just had Star Wars Jedi Survivor released on older platforms, and it's always a FIFA or a Call of Duty maybe that's still doing that 4 years into a cycle. But we're getting it, and so many of the big games are still, and you've got that feedback from gamers that are going, we just want you to let go of the past and make games for that fully utilizes the power of the new consoles. You're not worrying about getting it running on PS4 or Xbox One, but with so many users still on those old generations, that doesn't make business sense. So I think if the transition is slower this year, I think we might end up seeing that some of the games that truly making the most of the current hardware might be a bit later in the generation as well. So like GTA 6, like Assassin's Creed Shadows. So I agree with you, Piers. I do wonder if we might be looking at an 8-year cycle this time, maybe.
Yeah.
Also makes me wonder if the slow transition is going to bleed over into the next generation. Like, if those 50% of PS4 owners are still only upgrading in the second half of this generation, they're not going to immediately want to buy another massive console in 2028, 2029, because they'll have only just upgraded. So we could be looking at another slow transition. I mean, that's a problem for the future, obviously, but
I mean, it's a good point. It's a good point because obviously there will also be kind of cross-platform support for new games, or there's a lot of back catalogue support as well, and that will be the strategy moving forward. So we have all these different dynamics compared to the PlayStation 3, PlayStation 4 transition, and we're still learning about those and what impact that has in terms of the user base and how quickly they shift to the new platforms.
What surprised me a bit about the announcement was how, particularly from the media, but I guess certain consumers as well, how negative they received the announcement, because mostly they focus on the price. And the reason why I was surprised by it, because I didn't see this as anything more than a high-end product for high-end PlayStation users. And if it's not like the games don't run on PS5. I can get it. Some people might want it and can't afford it, and that's always a frustration. But I felt like the reaction was overly negative for what is in my mind, a pretty targeted concept at the moment. And my theory on it is maybe there's something else that's frustrating them. And I look at this generation, look at this last couple of years for PlayStation, and outside of Spider-Man 2, the sort of games that PlayStation fans love from PlayStation, they've not had a lot of them at the moment. And we've just had Astro Bot, which is fantastic, but even that's not really the God of War style Spider-Man, Horizon style game. And my brain has gone to, it's also been a quiet year. Last year was quite big for AAA releases. This year's been pretty quiet. That it's more of a frustration that it's not that they don't want a PS5 Pro, it's that they want something else. They want something to get excited about. And Sony have shifted their announcement strategy. There used to be a time back in the early days of the PS4 where they were announcing games 4 or 5 years away from completion. They'd announce games on E3 that weren't even in development yet. But it's now they don't do that at all. I think things like the recent releases, Concord, Astro Bot, and the upcoming Lego Horizon, they weren't really announced until about 3 months ago. So you're sort of seeing a sort of a Nintendo approach to announcing games quite late. And I think if PlayStation fans maybe knew there was a Wolverine around the corner or an Uncharted 5 or whatever, they might feel a little bit more relaxed about Sony making stuff that they don't really want at this point in time, or they don't need. The reaction to Concord was a pretty good game from what I can gather, was also quite negative, but it's because it wasn't the game they want. I think next year's going to be busier, at least from a third-party point of view, for PlayStation users. But I do wonder if actually it's misplaced frustration rather than actual anger at the concept of a PS5 Pro.
It's a good point. Like all the titles they used to demonstrate the capabilities of the PS5 Pro were all first party, or there was single player blockbuster. It was The Last of Us, Spider-Man, Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart, like all those kind of single player games that can really squeeze every ounce of juice out of a console. And that would have been an easier sell if they weren't relying on older titles. Like the most recent title they showed was Spider-Man 2, which was last year. Like the first demonstration was The Last of Us, which again, going back to that whole, these are cross generation titles. These were available on PS4 as well. Like Ratchet and Clank was a launch title, and so if there was like something coming up, the next God of War, the next Uncharted, and they showed you what it looks like ahead of launch, that would have been a much easier sell and it would have been a much more exciting.
Well, it's a good point, but I'm wondering if, because a lot of, I think, the PlayStation 5 Pro enhanced games will be third party, and I think maybe they've pushed out the responsibility for saying that or exhibiting it to third parties, perhaps, to an extent. I don't know if we're going to get more information. They might, for example, the latest Assassin's Creed, isn't that going to be one of the... that's going to be...
Yeah, so people forget about this, because I think PS5 is so far in the lead as a console platform that every game is basically a PlayStation launch, a big PlayStation moment, right? Even Call of Duty, which I know is going to be on Game Pass and stuff like that. Assassin's Creed Shadow is a major PlayStation release, even though it's a Ubisoft game, that's going to showcase what that hardware can do. And we do fixate a little bit on first-party exclusives, because I think that's important to Microsoft and Game Pass. It's very important to Nintendo. But as a PlayStation, it is, PlayStation fans love that stuff, but, in the old days, first party wasn't what people bought PlayStations for. It was for Tomb Raiders and Resident Evils and Grand Theft Autos, and those weren't PlayStation games. It wasn't until, in fact, before the PS4 generation, the only game that had ever broken 10 million units from PlayStation was Gran Turismo. And it was only since then that we've started to see these sort of blockbusters emerge from PlayStation studios. I
guess it's because they are now the key exclusives. They are the products that differentiate the platform from the competition. Yeah. So
I do wonder if they should tease a little bit. I did, they announced there was a lot of people comparing their presentation in May to Xbox's, but Xbox's presentation showcased games that will come out in 2024, 2025, 2026, maybe even longer, where Sony was just showing games that are coming out between now and November, and I completely agree. I don't think you should be announcing too far out too early. It can get frustrating. People, things get cancelled and changed and delayed, and it can cause all sorts of issues. But I think when you've got a slate that looks a little bit quiet at the moment, a tease or two wouldn't go amiss, I don't think.
Yeah, it was quite sort of lo-fi, wasn't it? The announcement, but I think this is a reflection of how they're positioning the product and. The expectation, I guess, in terms of sales of the product. It's not a complete transformation. It's a premium product, and I'm sure there will be more information coming out about the comparisons, doing sort of decent comparisons. In the run up to Assassin's Creed launch, when is the launch? I don't have it off the top of my head, but
November, I think.
Yeah. So that's. I think it's actually second week of November. So it coincides very nicely with launch. So I imagine there's going to be some kind of crossover in relation to promotion of that. I know they're not doing any bundles or anything like that. It's just a pure product.
Oh right.
Yeah.
Well, you said just before the call. You said before we spoke about the price and about how actually hardware. And you mentioned this in your analysis. Cost of manufacturing is really high. Margin, we know, is more important than ever at the moment. And also,
I don't think this is a margin like profit gouging thing. This is not like this is just establishing a margin which they want to try and achieve on the existing platform, and they want to take that into the PlayStation 5 Pro.
Yeah.
I think they tried to work at different price points, but actually they ended up, this is what we can achieve at this price point, and that's what we're going to go for. So it's not like they want to make huge profits, but they also don't want to.
They don't do that on hardware anyway. But I think that perhaps the days of them losing big sums of money on the hardware is something they're trying to avoid. And you meant and the Xbox Series X, the new fancier version of that. It's quite a big expensive product for that. It's not as expensive as as the PS5 Pro. But I think we're just seeing. It's interesting. I guess obviously we're old, right? And we remember the days. I say old, older. And we remember the days when we expect hardware to go down to £100 or $100, or that was.
Yeah,
the
we
thing.
haven't had that. We haven't had that this cycle. We haven't had any discounts. Prices have been going up.
Yeah.
Obviously, we had the Japan price go up. I think 3 times for PlayStation. I think it's 3 times.
Yeah.
At least twice.
We've not had that mass market price point that the sort of PS2 and the Wii and those sort of.
Well, it's going to be interesting what the Switch 2 hits the market at.
Yeah.
At the moment we're sort of saying $400, £400, €400 or whatever, around that sort of level. But conceivably, it could be more than that, depending on what the technology is.
Yeah.
Well, how much was the Steam Deck when it first launched? I think the entry one was like 5. No, maybe not quite so much as that. I can't quite remember off the top of my head.
No, I think it was around. I think it was around 500. I think it was around 500. The Steam Deck. Like, yeah, I'm intrigued to see what the Switch 2 will do price wise. Like a lot of people are assuming 400ish. So people are already pointing to the PS5 Pro, and it's like, well, that's 2 Switch 2s in terms of its price. Like it's
$400. It was
the way that
yeah.
400.
The base version of Steam Deck.
The base version, cheapest version of the Steam Deck. Yeah. Sorry, James, go back.
No. I was right. No, I was just saying, like, kind of reiterating that point, like similar to how we've seen that there is an audience out there that wants to buy premium things like the £200 DualSense Edge controller, £200 PlayStation Portal. All the super duper special editions. Like there are people, the phones, the price of phones now. Like the iPhone Pro, the iPhone 16 Pro Max, which was announced like the same week as the PS5 Pro. That's
perception
well over
of value varies, though, isn't it? There's people
Like,
out there will tell they won't spend £5 buying a Mario game on their phone, but they're happy to spend £20 going to see the film at the cinema. Right? It's values are complicated when we get into those kind of conversations.
I think people, when it's comparative, but actually, if you compare it with other electronics and other expenditure, and how long you're going to play it, and how long you're going to keep it, etc., it's actually still in that kind of value bracket, which is not obscene. It's not offensive. Yeah. It's still going to be relevant to a good chunk of people, but they're just they're comparing it with what they paid for the PlayStation 5, etc.
Nintendo obviously has got a broader audience. That's their thing, right? And I think that's where they're going to have. They're going to have. That
and obviously the hardware will not be as capable, in terms of output and all the sort of tricks and whistles that PlayStation 5 Pro has. And
one thing I found interesting around this, like going back to what we were saying about the cost of manufacturing, how the cost of manufacturing is increasing. Like I either didn't realise or forgot until all this analysis has come out around the PS5 Pro, that the PS4 Pro only accounted for 12% of PS5's lifetime PS4's lifetime sales. So only it only accounted for like 1 in 10 PS4.
When it first came to market, it was selling around 20% of share.
Right,
okay. And it did, because obviously it came in year 3, but overall, the whole life cycle is 12%. But in the years it was available, it's a higher percentage.
Right, got you. Okay.
Yeah, because obviously the PlayStation 4 had already been in the market for 3 years.
But even so, I find those figures, and I wonder, like, did Sony expect or hope for more? And then, like, going in, like, knowing that this is a niche product, or at least a product targeting a very specific audience. Like, I find myself wondering, like, I mean, it must be worth it. Well, Sony must believe it must be worth it, or they wouldn't do a PlayStation 5 Pro. But I find myself looking like when people are expecting this to only sell to kind of 10-20% of PS5 owned or PlayStation fans, sorry, like at the expense of manufacturing and distribution and like all this, is it worth it? I don't know.
Well, people that pick it up will spend more money definitely than if they stay on the PlayStation 5, whatever they want, they want to take advantage of it, and it's part of like a broader strategy, I guess, which they hope will keep momentum, keep their kind of leadership in terms of this cycle, and it, from their perspective, obviously worked for them for last cycle, even though it didn't sell. It sold, I think, a little bit under 15 million over the whole cycle. So in that taking that into account, they obviously felt that it's a legitimate commercial strategy. So
I think the other bit, there's an interesting, if you ever read the newsletter of Nathan Brown, which I do from time to time, he made a really good point. Sony revealed a stat that 75% of people, when they have to choose between performance mode and graphics mode on a PlayStation 5 game, 75% of users choose the performance mode. And he used that as a sort of, well, we really should offer both so they can have graphics and performance, and that's the whole pitch of it. Why not have both? But it's interesting that, because we're also, if you look at the broader market situation of the rising costs of games and the amount of time it's taking to make these games, there is this question around issue: are we spending an awful lot of time on things that gamers, broadly speaking, don't necessarily want? Are we spending an awful lot of time on features and graphical enhancements and stuff that actually, if you weren't chasing realism, if you weren't doing this, that, and the other, you could get this game out faster and make more money from it? And I wondered if that 75% stat told me something different, or told Nathan Brown in particular something different than what it told Sony, which is that actually gamers, they just want it to run well. That's more important to them than how detailed the graphics are.
Well, you could argue that the advancements that are offered in PlayStation 5 Pro are actually enabling creators to come to market more rapidly with games that don't necessarily have the graphic fidelity, which then can be upscaled in terms of the AI use and the additional resolution support and upscaling. So
yeah,
obviously it's using the existing, and that would be relevant to all the PlayStation 5 catalogue and the PlayStation 4 games. These will be PS4. Let me get this right. PlayStation 5 Pro Boost mode, is it? Or Boost Game Boost? Game Boost, I think it's called. Yeah. So those will be enhanced in that respect. So I think there's a kind of trade-off as the technological advancements. People are looking for more fidelity, etc. They want to run 60 frames per second for 4K content, etc. But obviously, from the publisher point of view and the developer point of view, they're looking to be more efficient in their production cycle and bring down the costs and stuff. So if this supports them doing that, then that's I think a benefit.
Yeah.
They also said, Sony have also said that they feel that this is a easier technological leap in terms of producing the content for these PlayStation 5 Pro enhanced games versus taking advantage of the ray tracing, etc. Is an easier leap than the PlayStation 4 to PlayStation 4 Pro in terms of the enhanced games. So
it's true.
That would seem a more efficient pipeline in terms of producing.
And what surprised Mark Cerny with the PS5 actually is how many people wanted to use things like ray tracing right out of the gate. Like he thought it would be a few years before developers en masse started making use of this technology, and he was surprised to see them using it sort of from the beginning. And I guess there's an element of, we can sit there and assume that, yes, publishers want to get the games out quicker, but they still want to make things that look, they still want to push the boundaries of what's possible. And yeah, as you say, if the PS5 Pro can enable them to push those boundaries and make games quicker, which is what the dream is, right? It's about making games not just faster and more cheaply. It's about making games faster, cheaply, and better. Is there a way that we can have our cake and eat it? And
And I'm sure that's what a lot of the big publishers are looking at now, and they're trying to make those pipelines more efficient. The whole kind of ray tracing thing, I think, is aligned a lot to do with the PC dynamic. There was, investment in that technology and taking advantage of that technology for some of the PC games.
Yeah.
That discussion about convergence of content and platforms in the context of consoles versus PC, that's obviously come up again because of the price point. People are saying, well, why don't people just buy a PC? It will be more expensive to get the capabilities that you're going to see within the PlayStation 5 Pro from a PC. But it doesn't sort of change the fact that there is this kind of convergence of experience, and certainly when you've got things like the Steam Deck and the promise of a Steam Deck 2 and the more console like experience of that from the end consumer point of view, it seems to me that things are converging. So can the console business still carve out a unique proposition within the market, and that's the kind of big question.
I've spoken to PlayStation a bit about this myself, and I've always had this feeling that consoles aren't supposed to be PCs under your TV. They are supposed to be living room devices that offer experiences that you don't play on your PC. But increasingly, it feels like some of them are going down that route, and sure, for me, it's not just about playing the incredible RPGs you can. It's supposed to be about fitness games and party games and family games, and I do wonder if when we're looking at PlayStation 6 or look further down the line, that I would hope those hardware leaps and changes are going to be more innovative than just what we're seeing necessarily with the Pro, which is like these are prettier, they run fast, they look better. Can we have some more innovations that maybe even a bit more novel? Otherwise, I do think that that convergence is going to.
Well, it's why Nintendo does so well with choose the innovation. Yeah. I think we've seen innovation in terms of Astro Bot.
That's
and innovative. And there is more. I'm sure there's more innovation to come, but I do totally agree that you've got to keep that engine of innovation going to make the product still
I think
appealing and stuff.
And I think it's good that they've put, actually, we haven't spoken about this much, but I like the fact that PlayStation's new leaders, both of the CEOs, aren't sales and marketing people, but they are product people. Right? They are, they're Nishina-san and Herman Holst are people that make games and make hardware. That's what their speciality is. That's where their background they come from, and I think that might. Well, we'll see how that plays out. It's definitely different to the sales and marketing people they've had in the past, but it might lend itself to that innovation. We're thinking a bit further ahead there.
Yeah, well, I hope so, because I think, like I say, having innovation in the market is always exciting for gamers and console gamers, and they want that innovation to keep going. That's why there's this positive sentiment around Nintendo and what they do, because they bring something unique and innovative to the market. So you've got to keep that.
Yeah, and Sony do that. I think to suggest the PS5 is just a PC under the box, is downplaying the DualSense, which is an amazing controller. And I know VR2 hasn't really done the business for them, but that's sort of a living roomy type thing as well. So they have had some of that. We're not seeing.
Oh yeah, absolutely. They're innovating. It's just whether you can get the content to keep coming, which takes advantage of that innovation, and with the backdrop, not in the context of Sony's own studios, but third party who are going multi-platform, etc. They have this backdrop of avoiding additional costs. They're trying to keep those budgets down, and often innovation is one of those things that unfortunately gets pushed to the side. You're
not necessarily going to make the most of Kinect or with smart glasses or anything like that if it's only going to be on one platform and a smaller audience. It doesn't. Yeah.
Gentlemen, we've been talking about this for longer than we actually record a normal Microcast, so I am gonna move us on slightly. There's one more story we wanted to talk about, and I'm sure we will be talking about the PS5 Pro more as as we approach launch. There's also been a lot of discussion around Ubisoft. This has been going on for a couple of weeks. Share prices have been falling since the launch of Star Wars Outlaws. There's still no official figures on how well Star Wars Outlaws has performed, but as we discussed in, what do the numbers mean last week? It doesn't appear to be done particularly well. The conversation has been around kind of recent performance.
Not done well yet.
Not done well yet. The conversation has been around like Ubisoft and it's recent performances. Star Wars Outlaws hasn't done well yet. Avatar did not do brilliantly. Skull and Bones came and went. Exactly. We forgot that Skull and Bones finally came out in February. I wanted to get your thoughts on just where Ubisoft is at as a company.
I'd say the thing. I've been playing quite a lot of Ubisoft games lately. I don't always, but I played Mario & Rabbids back in at the end of last year and the year before, which was a great game, but it didn't hit their targets. and Assassin's Creed Mirage, I think did okay for them. Great game, fantastic game. I thought Avatar's a really good game. I think Star Wars Outlaws is a great game. I saw a journalist online describe it as a negative critical reaction. That's not what it got. It got an okay critical reaction. And so they've put out quite a lot of decent stuff. But Prince of Persia as well, some of the small niche things, but they haven't had a hit for a little while. And Ubisoft are so much more hit-driven business than they're still in that. They don't quite have. They do have games like X Defiant, and they have games like Rainbow Six. They do have some live service games, but they're not.
Rainbow Six is talk of live service games for Ubisoft. Rainbow Six is still right.
Oh yeah, it does very, very well for them.
Raising a lot of interest and engagement.
They don't have like an NBA or a FIFA or a GTA Online. I feel that they're still a little more reliant on, compared to their competitors, more reliant on those big tentpole games. They've got a big one. I've seen Assassin's Creed Shadows. I think you did as well, James. Did you see it at Gamescom?
No, I didn't get a chance to see it at Gamescom, but I hear
I saw it. I saw it at some games. I thought it looks fantastic. And that game, the last game, Valhalla, did very, very well in the West. It's obviously got it's a Japanese, Assassin's Creed Shadows is set in Japan, and if you look at what Ghost of Tsushima did, which is a similar Western developed action adventure game set in Japan, did very well in that market. So I think it's potential to sort of widen this Assassin's Creed. Where its challenge is, it's only on the new consoles, so it's not on older hardware. So that's going to potentially be a bit of a down point for them. But I think that looks great, and I think Assassin's Creed is theirs, and it's a little bit more bankable, and I'm sure that'll hopefully there might be a bit more pressure on that now, because I was a bit disappointed in Star Wars Outlaws numbers. I was expecting more. I think we talked about it before.
I've got a global estimate for Star Wars outlets across Xbox and PlayStation. If you want.
Do you have one? Go on.
About 800,000.
Okay. Oh really? No, it's still. So, but
that was for the end of August. So that
had been on sale a couple of days. So yeah, hopefully it's past. I was going to say hopefully it's past that million mark, but usually they'd at least announce that it's past 1 million sales.
Well, I think the games. It's not the story of games like this. It's a weird year, right? So you look at the year ahead. You look at the Christmas we've got. There's some big games coming out. There aren't that many. And when you look at a game like, Assassin's Star Wars Outlaws, you think, I expect it'll be in Black Friday deals and promotions and offers. As a PS4 game, as Xbox One game, it's one of the bigger games that's coming out. It's a bit weird that it came out right next to the launch of another PS4 Star Wars game. But it is I think there's still a chance for it. Avatar sort of fell away quite quickly. It didn't hit. It did okay. We're not talking Concord levels of flops here, right? We're talking games that just perhaps didn't break out in a way that we thought they might. It's a really tricky industry. I find it fascinating how these licensed games don't necessarily deliver. They're not as
and obviously they have to pay for there's the expense of the license for that. Obviously, you need to earn more. Looking at the daily active user data, I just looked it up on our platform. It's looking, it's looking okay.
Yeah.
So we've got it at the moment up until the 8th of September. We're getting the refresh today for the previous weeks, so it'll be interesting to see whether that's come down a lot, but it's relatively consistent from launch onwards in terms. Did it have a pre-launch?
3 days early access.
3 days,
in the super duper special edition.
So that was too specific. Was that for people with the deluxe edition?
And I think it's interesting actually. Somebody mentioned on social media, I don't expect it's going to be very high, but how Ubisoft, is it Ubisoft Plus, the subscription service, how that's impacting? Because Ubisoft's approaching that as almost like a rental scheme for their games, right? You can subscribe for a month and play. In fact, you did it for Assassin's Creed Mirage. You could have subscribed at the beginning of that month, played it, completed it, and unsubscribed, and had the game. Because it's not a big game, Assassin's Creed Mirage. Same with games like Prince of Persia.
Outlaws is a similar length. It's not like 100-hour game for there. So people could just rent, as you say.
So I don't think the numbers are huge. I'm not expecting it to have been like hundreds of thousands. It's not available on every platform, Ubisoft Plus, but it's just an interesting thing that have created an opportunity for you to basically rent a Ubisoft game. And Ubisoft said when we spoke to them earlier in the year, like 1 in 10 people who are because of their system, they're finding like a lot of it's bringing in people who've never played a Ubisoft game before, because they can now go, I can give this a go for I don't know, 15 quid or whatever it is, and play and maybe even complete this Ubisoft game. And I think I think they're okay with that. It's just I don't know if that might be having a detrimental impact upon the sales figures. But it's I feel I'm a little concerned for Ubisoft. I think that they've put out some really good stuff actually in the last 2 years. I don't think they've not had their moment. But then we haven't really had a big main Assassin's Creed. We haven't had a big main Far Cry. One is coming in November, and I think there'll be a lot of attention on that.
It's looking positive, I think, for the next Assassin's Creed. It's the sentiment out there looks really.
Oh yeah,
positive.
I've no doubt that Shadows is definitely going to be a hit. Like I would be shocked if that doesn't do well. But it's as you say, Chris. Like we haven't had another Far Cry, another Watch Dogs, another a Ghost.
Watch Dogs. That's an interesting one. I was thinking about back to the launch of the PS4, and when you look at things like Watch Dogs, it's sort of faded away a bit. But I think I thought it was interesting they decided to sort of take massive off Division and start and work on those licensed games, and now they're doing the next game's Division 3. I'm not entirely sure that it would have been but we've seen this a lot. We've seen it with Square Enix as well, right? They put a lot of their studios on. Well, our games aren't quite hitting the numbers we want to hit. Hey, how about we put Marvel characters into them and build it? And that hasn't worked either. I don't think the solution is, and I'm not saying that's what Ubisoft have done here, but I don't think a solution to creating a bigger hit is necessarily plastering a brand and license in it. I think
well, I guess it depends what the license is, doesn't it?
Yeah, there are exceptions to that story, but
I mean, I think Star Wars seems to me to be, although it's got such a long history when it comes to the game space, but is it a little bit tired in terms of
maybe
but actually generating interest?
The reason why I thought it would do well is because Star Wars Jedi Survivor did really well the year before, and Lego Star Wars did really, really well the year before that. I think they're two of the fastest.
But is that I think that's the innovation of the combination of Lego with Star Wars.
Yeah. It's been a while since we had a Lego Star Wars.
I think Outlaws, when it was originally shown, but it was generating a lot.
It was. So in IGN has this wish list feature on its data, and Star Wars Outlaws is still very high in that wish list, where it was until it came out. And that was a lot of that was driven from that initial Summer Games Fest E3 announcement. It was a really big reveal. And then if you look at just the second Summer Games Fest, it was quite low down on the list, Star Wars. It got drowned out by a lot of other games. Now that's going to happen because it wasn't a new announcement. But it did worry me a little bit that what was the hero title a year before, a year later was out of the top 10. And that was the first time I remember, Jane, we were talking about how well if you think it would do. I was getting a bit anxious because I worried the momentum had dipped. And I think that's the thing. Like, we're getting to this point where games are being announced closer and closer to release. And Star Wars Outlaws had unusually, really, had quite a long PR cycle. And you look at some of the big games coming out this year. We just had Astro Bot, we've got Zelda coming up, even Call of Duty, even though we knew it'd be there. They were sort of, and even Assassin's Creed Shadows was only shown a few months ago, right? So they're a lot. The from announced to release is a lot shorter for those titles, and maybe that's more effective. I don't know. We should get a PR and marketing expert.
We should.
Yeah, I mean, there's a bigger question here around sort of IP and what resonates with audiences and stuff. I think we touched on it a little bit there in the context of Star Wars license. But I think games IP as a whole, as a driver of a franchise, have become much more relevant and important. So we're seeing more content take the shift from games to other entertainment. Yeah. And it's not just about sort of hanging on the coattails of audiences from other entertainment franchises. So there is this kind of change in dynamic. It's understanding what those consumers that have come in to the market. So it's not me and you so much. It's more these people that have now buying into consoles and they're sort of becoming the console users and stuff. What sort of interest they have in different IP and stuff.
Well, I've got another IP. We have a segment at the end of this, Piers, which I'm going to mention another IP in that. So that has done very well.
Well, let's subtly segue into that segment, Chris. It is time for me to ask you, as I do every week, what do the numbers mean?
What do the numbers mean? So I want to say there's somebody who listens to our podcast that keeps referring to this segment as By the Numbers, and I'd love to know our listeners' opinion in whether or not we should be calling this By the Numbers rather than What do the numbers mean, which is a reference to a Call of Duty Black Ops from about 10 years ago. No, sometimes we talk about games that are coming up, and sometimes we talk about games that have just come out. And it's actually been quite a busy week for video game reveals and releases. The one that a lot of the critics are talking about, everyone's very excited about, is the game Astro Bot from Team Asobi and PlayStation Studios. This game is an interesting one. It's a family-ish title, although at the beginning you should expect a lot of PlayStation fans to be excited by it with all the character cameos in it. It's a game that's been made by a small team, 65 people in that team. It's been made in 3 years. It's a game aimed at a broader market, so you should do, you may not always be a week one launch. And the game has done, I think it's done okay. It's the number 2, last week it was number 2 in the UK and number 3 across Europe. Sales for the game was, if you compare it to, I don't know why I picked this game. I picked Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart. It's a sort of platform game, Ratchet and Clank, but it's a little more action orientated and a bit more teen orientated than Astro Bot. But sales are for Astro Bot compared to that in the UK are up 21%. For the whole of Europe, it's up about 2%. I'm not sure all the European data's in yet though. So this is GSD data, by the way, from the European market data. If you compare it to obviously a big PlayStation game, it's nowhere near those sort of numbers. Astro Bot versus Spider-Man 2 is down, it's 80% bigger. Spider-Man 2's launch, and it's roughly that in Europe too. But I think it's an okay launch. I think it's it's done very well critically. Don't think the budget wasn't super high for it. It's a platform game. If you look at games like Sackboy and how those titles perform on PlayStation, it's good. It's fine.
It's an evergreen. It's an evergreen title, isn't it?
Yeah.
It doesn't go out of fashion. No one's waiting for the next version of it to come the following year, kind of thing. It's just going to carry on.
I expect it to feature in, if PS5 Pro is targeting that luxury gamer and they want to bring PS5s into the more family audience, I expect Astro Bot to play a role in that. And so, I think it's solid. I think it's a decent result. I think a lot of people online there's a lot of chatter around, I hope this shows PlayStation that you don't need to have big budgets to deliver big numbers. And I'm like, well, not really big numbers. We're not on that scale, but it's done very well. I should think it'll probably do 4 or 5 million units by all said and done. That would be a very big success, I think.
It do great around, the holiday season in terms of Christmas gifts and stuff, I think.
The number 1 game was, we talked about Star Wars a minute ago, about IP that not guaranteed to success. An IP that seems to do very, very well at the moment is the Warhammer for IP. So the number 1 game is Warhammer 40,000 Space Marine 2. Number 1 in the UK, number 1 in Europe. It's the fastest selling Warhammer game so far in the UK. Not quite for Europe. The number 2, by the way, the biggest one in Europe and number 2 in the UK is Total War Warhammer 3. In fact, if you look at the 6 biggest Warhammer launches, all of them have come in the last 10 years. So things like Darktide, Vermintide, Total War Warhammer, they've all launched in that. It's been a real good hit. I think there's some figures out there saying it's done around 2 million units. It's been really great. I saw a couple of critics refer to it as an Xbox 360 game in the best possible way, which I think sort of perhaps there's a certain simplicity to it that some of these bigger, more expansive, complicated open world games don't. But it's been a big hit, and it's been a great result there for I think Saber's the developer. It's sort of what we didn't talk about it too much in the build up to this week. I think a lot of the conversation was around Astro Bot and in the US NBA 2K25, but it's been a good success. And there was a time, by the way, Warhammer Because I used to talk to the THQ team quite a bit, where Warhammer was like Games Workshop was terrified of video games, right? They licensed the game, Dawn of War and stuff like that. They licensed Warhammer IP, but they didn't. They have this big festival. I've forgotten the name of it. It's going to drive me nuts. There's a Warhammer festival, basically an official event, and video games companies weren't really allowed to attend and showcase their games because they viewed it as a competitor to their tabletop experience. They've gone the opposite way now. You know, there's loads of Warhammer titles out there. There's that Doom style game Bolt Gun that came out recently. There's an abundance of they've opened it up very much to lots and lots of different audiences, lots of different developers of all different scales and sizes. And broadly speaking, I think there was a question of the quality being a concern. It seems to be working all right for them. Space Marine 2, big hit this week. The other game that I'm going to mention, it's a very US centric game. This one. It's NBA 2K25. Performance seems largely flat. Again, I'm not sure I've got all the European figures in yet, but it's down about 1.2% in Europe versus NBA 2K24. But it's worth noting NBA 2K24 was a disappointment. It was quite, 10-20% down over the previous year's title, both in terms of revenue and in terms of audience. And Take-Two, we spoke to Strauss Zelnick at Take-Two last month, and he said that, we think we've worked out why, and that won't be an issue for the next game. But the numbers I'm seeing so far, and again, not everything's in, we need to wait a little bit longer to sort of see that flesh out a bit. The numbers we're seeing so far are suggesting more of a similar performance to last year's title so far. Those. So this week's, I'll sort of give a little bit of a chat around the big games that have come out in the last week. That's what the numbers mean. Maybe next week we can talk about the new Zelda, which is just around the corner.
Here's hoping, yes. Brilliant. Thank you, Chris. I think I'm going to have to wrap us up there because we have gone on so much longer than we ever do.
It's not really a microcast anymore, is it, James?
It's not really a microcast anymore. But
I thought when you said microcast, it was going to be about like sort of 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Well, that was the original plan, but there was so much to talk about this week. There was so much.
They're going to just absolute snooze fest.
It's become we do try and do them quick, and we do them. They tend to be around 25 to 30 minutes long, but every now and again we have a guest on, and there's a lot to talk about, and it goes on longer, and that's fine. Nobody's complained when that's happened. In fact, they like it. So I think hopefully
we'll see. Piers, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate you having to kind of dive deeper into the PS5 Pro topic and all the rest of the stuff that we've been talking about this week.
No problem. Great to be here. Thanks very much.
And where can people find you online? Any links you want to kind of plug?
You can go to our company site. That's ampereanalysis.com. But there's quite a lot of free insights on that site. So we cover all sort of entertainment. We're not just games. I lead the games research, but we cover other entertainment areas. But you can go on there and filter on games, and if you're interested in the game space and like looking at bits of data and bits of analysis, then by all means just go over there, check it out.
Thank you very much. You can find us, obviously, at GamesIndustry.biz. You can find previous episodes of this podcast on the podcasting platform of your choice. Just search for the GamesIndustry.biz podcast. You can sign up to our newsletter, the GI Daily, at GamesIndustry.biz/newsletters. We're going to be back next week with hopefully a much shorter show. Chris, best of luck with the rest of HR Summit. I will see you there on Wednesday. And thank you so much for joining us.